After the release of the Digimon Pendulum, the Digimon brand would explode in several directions, and would do so very successfully. Digimon wasn't just a series of virtual pets anymore. It was a multimedia franchise that went into video games, a popular card game, and one of the most memorable children's anime of all time. Digimon Adventure started airing in March of 1999, and would be released 5 months later in English to a lot of fanfare. In the US, Digimon debuted on the Fox network, which had a very popular Saturday morning block called Fox Kids. Well, the internet tells me it was Saturday morning, but I'm almost positive it aired on Sunday mornings where I lived, but that was 20 years ago and my memory may not be what it used to be. Either way, the important thing is that Fox Kids hyped Digimon a lot, and every kid I knew had not only watched it, but loved it. To this day, if you ask someone about Digimon, that anime is what most people will default to thinking about, especially in the US and other less fortunate countries. You see, by the time Digimon Adventure finished its initial run in Japan, they had 14 virtual pets, over 300 cards in the trading card game, and 4 video games that were all completely independent of the anime, as well as 2 WonderSwan games that served as crossovers within the anime. In the United States, we had 2 virtual pets with no plans for more, about 170 cards with no plans for more, and Digimon World wouldn't even release until the English run of the anime was almost over. While we would see more video games come out, there were a significant number that could never be localized, because the WonderSwan never released here, though a lot of those had direct ties to the anime. There was also an attempt to restart the card game, skipping a few sets to do so, but that attempt ultimately failed as well, for reasons I'm not getting into today. So with the anime being the only real foothold in the US, plenty of merch was released featuring the main characters, including books, figures, and even this miniature puzzle. Digimon was one of those shows that was built to sell toys, but thankfully the show itself was actually good, unlike the blatant 20-minute commercials that some of the cartoons from the 80s were.
It's Gunhaver in the new Cheat Command Snowmobile.
It wasn't just the kids and monsters featured in the show though. There was one piece that was more toyetic than any other, the Digivice. Inside the fiction of the show, Digivices were these cute little beeping devices that each kid on the show had. These devices acted as a link between the kids and the Digimon, allowing the Digimon to evolve. After watching just a couple of episodes, I definitely found myself wanting one. They were honestly a pretty clever way to include Digimon's origin in the show, as the device itself bore a striking resemblance to the virtual pets, with its small screen and 3 buttons. Obviously Bandai knew what it was doing, and it released the first Digivice toy in July 1999, just a few months after the show started airing. This Digivice is not that original one, but is the version 15th released in 2014, but the basic functionality and design remains consistent. Despite the fact that the device was inspired by the virtual pets, it itself was not one, as there was no actual raising mechanic. When talking about Digimon electronics, Digivices represent a different category than the virtual pets, except in one special instance that we'll cover in a minute. It does get confusing sometimes, as Bandai themselves have referred to certain virtual pets as Digivices, but for the sake of clarity, we generally use Digivice and virtual pet as separate terms. So let's look at how this first Digivice made itself unique from the virtual pets. Right away, we can see the design is completely different, with the buttons surrounding the screen, and it's obviously not a rectangle anymore. The button you see on the left is actually 2 buttons, so that you can scroll in 2 directions instead of 1. The screen got a big upgrade by increasing the size from 32 by 16 pixels to a fully squared 32 by 32. The bigger screen, of course, means it also has bigger sprites, which would allow for more detail. Usually. I will say that many sprites in the Digivice are a bit boring or odd looking, and I think Bandai's later attempts at large sprites came out much better. Regardless, the sprites were much closer to how the artwork looked, especially for Digimon like Goemon, whose original sprite was pretty loosely interpreted when it was drawn. You'll notice though that the icons surrounding the screen are no more. So rather than cycling through the different icons to access various menus, pressing the button would bring up a full screen list that you could scroll through. I personally preferred having the icons, but this was a solid workaround that would make its way into the V-Pets as well. Up top, we see the same connectors that were present on the other virtual pets, meaning that not only could this Digivice battle with other Digivices, but it would battle with the pets as well. Then we have an antenna, which you may be surprised to learn is not just there for show. The Digivice could basically detect electronic devices for specific events, and so you would need to hold its antenna close to such a device in order for it to be successful. Around back, we have a belt clip rather than a keychain, and this clip existed to facilitate the primary gimmick for the device, its pedometer. By the time the Digivice released, pedometer LCD toys were already a somewhat established genre, with such famous releases as the Dragon Quest Arukendesu and the Pocket Pikachu. These devices would count your steps as you walk, and these counted steps would impact gameplay. For the Digivice, it was meant to represent you going on a journey with your Digimon partner, so as you walked in the real world, it would walk in the digital world. After a certain number of steps, a battle would occur. During these battles, you would have a few options. You could attack, evolve, switch partners, or auto battle. Evolving would power you up to make fights easier, at the cost of some DP. And after a battle, you would revert back to your child form, just like the characters in the show do. You could win items after battles, such as meat and protein, but you didn't actually have to care for your partner Digimon like on a virtual pet. Instead, these items would just power up your Digimon in different ways. While you had to just pick one partner Digimon to start with, you would eventually be able to recruit others as well, and could even add Vidramon to your team as a reference to V-Tamer. A second version would come out later that would not only add Tailmon to the roster, but would let you recruit several villains as well. So that's the Digivice as it was released in Japan, but what about elsewhere? Well, despite the fact that the United States did not see any virtual pet releases after the Digital Monster version 2, the Digivice was indeed released here. Well, kind of. For whatever reason, instead of just translating the Digivice and releasing it in other parts of the world, a new Digivice was made. This American Digivice would go on to be the one sold in other parts of the world, while the Japanese device remained exclusive. So what was the difference? A lot, surprisingly. As you can see, the shape is overall the same, but there are a few noticeable changes. First, the screen is smaller than the Japanese version, using the same size as the original V-Pets, meaning that smaller sprites had to be used. Interestingly though, all of the sprites used on the American Digivice were completely unique, for better or for worse. The left button was also no longer bidirectional, and was used to confirm selections, while the top right button was used to change selections. And while not a visible change, there is nothing in this device that detects electronics, so the antenna truly is just for show. Apart from that, gameplay is largely the same. You still walk around with the device and get into battles. You start by choosing a partner Digimon, with this one featuring Tailmon as the secret character. The later versions would also feature ultimate level Digimon like Wargreymon and Metal Garurumon, who did not appear on the Japanese versions. One fun addition was that in addition to walking, you could decrease the number of steps you would need to take to reach a boss by playing a slot or card game. Overall, it was a bit of a downgrade compared to the Japanese version, but on its own, it was a perfectly fun device that I took everywhere with me. Of course, more toys had to be sold, so it became standard that every new season of the show would feature not only a new cast of characters, but a new Digivice as well. Toys based on the D3, D-Arc, and D-Scanner were all created in Japan, and just like the Digivice, unique devices were made for other parts of the world that would follow a similar premise, but with several changes. The American version of the D-Arc, called the D-Power, even featured an online game. I played it a few times as a kid, and it was not very good. It was basically a very low frame rate 2D fighting game, where you could transfer in the Digimon on your device. Sadly, the servers for that game have been shut down long ago, so it can no longer be played, nor can I even access the Digimon directory included on the disc that had details for the 371 Digimon that existed at the time. I unfortunately got rid of most of my Digimon toys after Digimon Frontier came out, as I didn't care for that show and I assumed I just didn't care for Digimon anymore. I was pretty stupid in middle school, and I regret doing that so much. Device-wise, I got rid of my American Digivice, D-Power, and Detector, but I kept this D3 for whatever reason. I eventually also bought myself this Digivice as well to replace my original one. After Frontier though, there was a long break before the next Digimon series, Digimon Sabers. This show featured the Digivice IC, but in a surprising twist, it's not like other Digivices at all. It's a full virtual pet. The IC is the only case in which a Digimon LCD toy can be considered both a Digivice and a virtual pet, and as such, I'll be covering it in depth in a later episode. The American counterpart, called the Datalink, was sadly not a virtual pet, though it did somewhat pretend to be one. We also have the Crossloader, which still holds the distinction of being the only Digimon electronic toy with a color screen, though I'm not gonna lie to you, I don't care about Cross Wars at all, so I know very little about this device. Other than that, it can play MP3s, because why not? After Cross Wars, we stopped really seeing new Digimon shows, as even Atmon was more of a spin-off than a normal Digimon series. But we sure did see a lot of re-releases. To coincide with Digimon Adventure Tri, the Digivice was re-released as the Digivice version 15th. It operates mostly the same as the original, but with ultimate forms for all 8 partner Digimon from the show, and a few other extras as well. We also saw version 15th released for the D3 and D-Arc, but strangely the D-Scanner never did receive one. After the release of Digimon Kizuna though, Bandai re-released the Digivice as the version complete, and includes Digimon found in Digimon Adventure Last Evolution Kizuna. There's one last Digivice to talk about too, and that's the Digivice colon. Well, technically you don't pronounce the colon, but if I didn't, then you wouldn't know what I was talking about. This device features a new design as seen in Digimon Adventure colon, and features flashing lights that appear as different events occur on the device. You still battle Digimon with it, but it does not appear to have connectivity options, nor does it seem to have a pedometer. That device isn't out yet at the time of this recording, so we don't necessarily know everything about it, but it does seem otherwise similar to the Digivice version 15th. And that's all I really want to say about Digivices. Digivices are a fun little toy to coincide with the shows, but I definitely prefer the true virtual pets when it comes to Digimon electronics. However, it's important to mention them in this brief history of Digimon V-Pets, as they definitely did have an influence on V-Pets in general. Apart from the Digivice IC, I won't be going over the other Digivices in detail, but there is one Digivice that I will mention on the next episode, as I'll be talking about a virtual pet that served as a companion device to the D-Scanner. Please consider subscribing if you'd like to see more of this series, and let me know what your favorite Digivice is in the comments below. Until next time, bye!